So we're in for a big treat here. We have some of the greatest minds in regulatory science here. It's been a tremendous changing decade for the FDA over the past 10 years. And so we're going to propose some more things they could change so that things could really be fixed. And we're going to start right off with that. I've asked everyone to come with a thought of if they could change anything, what would they do? And we'll just go down the line. It'll probably easiest. So we'll start with Don.
So thanks, Matt.
One of the greatest minds in statistics here. So,
considering I'm the only statistician here.
No, you're not merely here. He is here, and he is also one of our great thinkers about statistics.
Thank you. So this morning we talked about failures in phase 3 and how it's the worst place to fail. And Glenn DeVries said that small phase 1 trials, then bigger, and then still bigger. When the Egyptians built pyramids, that's not the way they built them. They built them with a major foundation and then smaller. So maybe we should rethink the drug pyramid. And the FDA, this is about the FDA has been a leader in this area, in the critical path initiative. Actually, one of my, what I do with the FDA, I would refund the critical path initiative. The idea is to make it more informative and better in the early phases. They've done really quite a number of things. They've worked in particular with me in developing a study called I-SPY 2, which I think is the future of research, not only in cancer, but in other diseases, which is adaptive, which tries to learn about which therapies benefit which patients in an online fashion in the context of the trial itself, and to, in the end, pair drugs and biomarker signatures with the goal of having not a 34% success rate, which is what we have in phase 3 trials in oncology, but an 85% success rate. Whether it achieves that is another matter, but it's well on the way. One of the innovations, actually, is, and we talked about pre-competitive this morning, is that it includes drugs from several pharmaceutical companies. So Pfizer, Puma, Amgen, Abbott, Genentech, Merck. You couldn't have done this 10 years ago, I know because I tried. It's a whole new era out there, a whole new attitude toward developing drugs. So I-SPY 2 is in neoadjuvant breast cancer. I won't tell you about the specifics of that, except to say that the FDA has also been involved in establishing neoadjuvant breast cancer, and in particular pathologic complete response, as a registration pathway. So they've, in working with the sponsor of I-SPY 2, which is a foundation for the NIH, which includes the FDA, they've been instrumental in working in developing I-SPY 2 and in other areas as well. They're mainly focused, of course, on adequate and well-controlled trials, the pivotal trials for registration, but they're working to some extent in the earlier phases, and I would certainly encourage that they do more in that direction. Okay. So I'll stop there.
Steve, what would you propose? I mean, that was a really interesting idea about turning the pyramid upside down, but what kind of data do you want?
Well, first of all, there's something I really want to kind of get out on the table. When you come to meetings like this, you often hear the mantra that the FDA is the problem, that we have a problem with innovation, and that the FDA is somehow, through the regulatory bureaucracy, is chilling innovation. And I strongly disagree with that. We do have an innovation problem in this country, but it's not because of the regulation. In fact, it would be a terrible mistake to in fact, reduce regulation of drugs and medical devices. The problem we have is that the easy targets have been found. So many drugs have now gone generic, and they're great classes of drugs, and it's very hard to beat these standard drugs. So the bar has gotten raised, which has made costs higher, clinical trial sizes larger. So my idea about how do we get back to innovation is not to do what some people have advocated, and I heard it this morning actually from Governor Perry, which is, don't regulate. That's not the right answer. The right answer is to find ways to incentivize innovation. And so here's a thought. We go to the Institute of Medicine and we ask the Institute of Medicine to declare certain areas to be areas of unmet medical need. Developing drugs in areas that we already have good therapies isn't innovation. In fact, those new therapies may not even be better than what we have. But we don't have good drugs for Alzheimer's. We don't have good drugs for obesity. We don't have good drugs for multiple drug-resistant tuberculosis. So you ask the IOM to declare areas of unmet medical need, and you provide an extra 2 years of exclusivity for a company that develops the first-in-class drug in those areas, a new molecular entity. That idea is an idea that lets the best of our system work for us. If you increase the rewards, then you get innovation. We don't want to do this by reducing regulation. We know what happened with the financial industry when we did it, and we've heard this over and over again over the last decade, that somehow the FDA is the problem. The FDA is not the problem. The diseases are the problem, and we still need to keep high standards for drug development.
Joe, I really want to hear what you think about that.
Well, I am founder and CEO of a medical technology company, so my input is going to be based on devices. Mm-hmm. And I think, first of all, I think we are on the right track of improving things at the FDA. I think things went really bad beginning in 2008. I can tell you, between the period of 2008 to 2010, the average length for us to get 510K clearance was 97 days, and it ranged from 50 days to 100 days. Between 2010 to 2012, in that 3-year period, the average length is 165 days, and from a minimum of 20 days to a maximum of 600 days and counting. So the reason I share that with you is because I think one of the things that FDA could do to improve things is the people. It's really all about the people. The reason we have this mixture from 20 days to 600 is because some reviewers do it differently than others. And I can't imagine running my company if I didn't have the power to hire the very best people and terminate the people that are not doing a great job. And I think one of the problems any government entity has, it's very difficult. It's a 30-page document to terminate someone that's not working out. So the leadership is doing a great job. They're trying to fix things, but you get this variation amongst the reviewers. And by the way, on regulation, there's some level of regulation that's healthy, but if you overdo it, it's unhealthy. Our entire way of doing things here has not proven to be any more safe or effective than products that are sold in Europe, which goes through a totally different process, where in fact it relies on the companies being responsible to do good things, and the doctors being responsible to make the right decisions. We have these doctors that have 12 years of education, many years of experience, and then we treat them like children. We treat them like minors, that they can't make decisions about what's best for their patients, and that some other third party has to worry about every little thing about the products.
When the time comes, I'd love to respond.
I know you would, but let's hear what Andy has to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. I think the conversation, as it's gone so far, is pointed out, one, this is really a much more complex process, and there are lots of parts and pieces. And I want to begin by first kind of making an overarching statement. As former commissioner of the FDA, and with the current commissioner going to follow me, it's really important to distinguish that there is a difference between criticizing and being critical. And I think what we're about here today is not to criticize the FDA. It's really to introduce some critical thinking about the fundamental question that, given all these tremendous advances in science and technology, some of the things that you heard even just an hour or so ago from Dan Kraft, do we have the right regulatory framework? Does the FDA have the capacity and the capability to really bring these incredible products and medical innovations to people in a rapid and efficient way? And I think the critical thinking around that is that we need to reinvent the FDA, to modernize the process. Some of the things, for example, you asked for one example, and there is no one thing that you need to do at the agency, but to just make the point. If we're going to see the benefits of regenerative medicine, if we're going to see solutions coming forward out of that field that are going to be the combination of a genetically modified stem cell combined with a biomatrix, combined with a growth factor that may be a biologic and maybe even encapsulated in a nanosphere, that entity that becomes a solution for someone's problem and needs to regenerate a kidney or a bladder or a trachea that you saw earlier, do we have the right regulatory framework for that? One of the changes that I think that's going to be required is we've dealt with components in CEDAR, CBER, CDRH, for example. We need to have a much more efficient and effective horizontal integration across those various entities so that you can come as an integrated, interoperable team to make an efficient, rapid, scientific-based regulatory decision about this new complex product that is much more than just the sum of its components. So I don't disagree with Steve in one sense that the FDA is not the problem. It's a phenomenal agency made up of phenomenal people doing an incredible job under the circumstances. But we also have to be critical and say, but do we need to do something differently if we're going to create the future and not just fix and deal with the past?
Now, Steve, you stand as one of the loud voices in the existing outcome studies, randomized controlled trials where half people get one thing and half get the other, very strong traditional data sources. So what are you thinking right now?
Look, how do you know that an innovation is an innovation? You know, you either know it because you trust that somebody has good feelings about it and therefore they're going to put it in a patient, a device, or you test it. And that's what clinical trials are all about, is testing alternative therapies. Now, the truth be told about the European medical device regulation is it's an unmitigated disaster. It is unregulated. You can get a CE mark on anything in Europe and start putting into people. The idea that you can't do harm with such a system is simply wrong. If you were one of the people that had a metal-on-metal hip, the 20,000 people that had to have their metal-on-metal hip taken out because that device should never have come to market, then that's a problem. And so you got to understand innovation is good, but it's only good when it makes people better. And the only way you know that it makes them better is to do adequate testing of those devices before you start using them widely across the society. And that's what we cannot lose in this deregulatory kind of environment.
But to the point, do we have to do that the way we've done it always in the past?
Well, Don Barry...
And Don's bringing
We're all going Don Barry.
Well,
the fact that the answer is no, that there's a different way of thinking about getting the information that you want. And look, his industry is critically depending upon a new way.
I agree, and I want to hear from Don, and you know, I think he's been very innovative. But the concept is still the concept. The concept is you've got to have the data. If you don't have the data, then it is not wise to consider something a step forward in healthcare until we know, via comparative effectiveness studies, that it's actually better than something else that we already have.
And so, Don, when you answer that question, let's throw on, to make this challenge a little more difficult for you, the fact that a lot of new drugs are not for these broad populations like people who get hips or people who have heart disease, but these small niche indications that may be true increasingly for devices too. So what do you do?
So back to the status quo. We have achieved in medicine in the last 60, 70 years, since the RCT, a science. We weren't a science before that.
Right.
We were anecdote and case studies. So the RCT, the randomized controlled trial, changed the world. But it hasn't changed itself in the last 60 or 70 years, with some tweaking. We've achieved a level we don't want to throw out. I agree completely that we don't want to throw out the baby for the bathwater. But we've got to go to a different level. And to Matt's point, and to a point that Andy was intimating at, and others have today, including Michael Torsten, who talked about rare diseases. So rare diseases are the canaries in the gold mine. They indicate where we're going, and it's not a pretty picture. And the FDA understands this, at least the people with whom I discuss at the FDA. They don't know what they're going to do when every cancer patient has an orphan disease. And that's where we're heading with the biology is taking us to places that we could only dream about, with smaller and smaller subsets of patients. How are we going to develop drugs within these small subsets? And it's going to have to be, and I've actually proposed some methods, it's going to have to be borrowing across histologies. So now you get approval for breast cancer or prostate cancer. Soon you get approval, I think, I hope, for HER2-neu cancer, for some diseases within HER2-neu cancer, within BRAF mutant cancers. And it's a wall that is going to change the world, and it has to change because biologists are taking us down this path. And we've got to have trials in small subsets of the disease, and that's going to mean, you know, the hypothesis testing and the type 1 error of 0.025 and the power of 90%, that's going to be things of the past. Exactly what the future holds, I don't know, but it's different from today.